and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
And I'm Ann Northrup.
Hi, Ann. With all these LGBTQ themed books in schools, the subject of so much controversy nationwide, our guest is Cory Silverberg, co-author with Fiona Smith of the new illustrated sex education book for teens, Sex, Bodies, Gender, Puberty, and Other Things.
Yeah, I think that's what it is, sex. But Cory can clear that up for us. We will also bring you news of LGBTQ winners and losers in last week's election primaries.
Federal appeals court says Arkansas can't ban gender-affirming care for young people.
We're winning day by day in those courts. The interim chief judge of the state of New York is an out gay man.
But there is some controversy, but not over his gayness. That diversity mural with LGBTQ themes that we showed you at a Brooklyn public school that was taken down by administrators, it's back up, bigger and better.
Yeah, but in Nebraska, a school newspaper has been shut down for covering LGBTQ issues after a 52-year run.
I hope they go independent. Virginia Governor Youngkin has put a racist homophobe on the UVA Board of Visitors. I went to school with them.
Yes, an old friend of Andy's. Well, I put that in quotes. We are going to mourn the deaths this week of Stonewall-era lesbian activist Susan Silverman and a great friend of both of us, ACT UP stalwart Mel Stevens.
Very sad to hear. And also sad to hear that 2 trans people with mental health issues have died at the hands of police in separate incidents.
Terrible. Good news from India, where the High Court says same-sex couples and other not mainstream couples are entitled to social benefits and legal protections.
Serbia is trying to cancel Europride in Belgrade. They're having none of it at Europride.
And I'm having dry throat. Vietnam has announced that LGBTQ people are no longer sick.
And monkeypox cases are falling, but now is not the time to let your guard down.
Especially since we've now heard of the first U.S. death maybe from monkeypox, maybe from other complications. We'll get to that later. But first, we are very honored to have with us today Cory Silverberg. Cory is a certified sex educator, former chair of the Sexuality Educator Certification for the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. But most of all, the celebrated and much awarded co-author of a series of sex education books for young people, early kids and up to teenagers. And this is the cover of his new book, Sex. And that's their co-author, Fiona Smith on the right, Cory on the left. Cory joins us from Toronto today. Welcome, Cory.
Thanks so much for having me.
Delighted to have you with us. Now, this is a horrible time in the United States, and I suspect there may be a little of this going on in Canada. Everything is under attack, and your books, and you've written a series of them, Sex is a Funny Word, What Makes a Baby, and now, Sex.
Right.
They have shown up on American Library Association lists of the most challenged books. And you were going through that before this all came up in the last couple of years. So what's your read on this atmosphere now and what's going on?
Well, it's part of the whole, it's part of a movement of, it's like I guess it's a backlash, but people have always wanted, there's always been white supremacy. There's always been people who want to silence certain stories and want to have people feel like they should be ashamed and should not be who they are. And unfortunately, and I mean, certainly in the States, but elsewhere, those folks are really emboldened, have been emboldened by who gets to be voted into high office and the way they talk. So, I mean, it's, the attacks on queer books and lesbian gay books are part of, I think one of the differences is now they're very clearly part of attacks on books that talk about race, honestly, efforts to talk about racial justice and not simply colorblindness. So you have these complaints that kids' books are teaching critical race theory, which is absolute nonsense, because if you read these books, they're not teaching critical race theory, they're just talking about race. And most of the people who are complaining don't know what critical race, or this sort of concept is.
Most of the people who are complaining aren't even parents with kids in these schools. They're organized by religious activists. But I guess I am, first of all, a little delighted and surprised that you could publish your book, Sex, in this atmosphere and not find your house being burned down. And
yeah, I mean, but the truth is, so I mean, the good news is that it's not surprising to me that I could publish the book, because there's lots of publishers that are publishing these books, publishing different stories, publishing queer books, publishing books that deal with race, that deal with other forms of oppression and systemic violence. But I do a lot to make sure my house doesn't get burned down, right? So the truth is, all of us are, part of our job now is security and safety, and we all experience harassment. We have each other. So there's lots more people who are publishing these books. So I have a lot of people to talk to and to deal with it. But the violence is real, and I mean, the same would be true of the two of you, right? Anyone who is talking publicly about gayness or queerness is going to be attacked on some level, and it's scary.
Well, I just want to say I love the book, and I learned a lot at the age of 68 as I read it. And I hope you'll write.
Never too late, Andy. Never too late.
And I hope you'll write one for old people too someday.
Well, this is I'm entering that category, right? So I'm 52 years old, and we absolutely want to keep going and basically write these books until we die. And so there will be one on menopause, though, that deals with menopause. There's this idea. I mean, part of what we're trying to do is reimagine sex education. And one of the things we don't like about sex education is the way that it pretends like, that we change when we're younger, right? So the message is like, puberty is this time of change. But anyone who's lucky to live beyond puberty knows that we have experienced many times of change, many cycles, including hormonal cycles. And so our bodies are constantly changing, and our minds are constantly changing, and who we are is changing. So we want to write. So in fact, it makes for us, we're going to keep writing these books because there's stuff to say, and there's stuff for us to be curious about.
And I'm sorry, you are very adamant and clear about the fact that you're certainly conveying detailed information, but it's really all done in the context of writing about relationships and showing kids working this out among themselves in school, in their friend groups, with their parents. And the illustrations will show some of this. You certainly emphasize diversity, including people with disabilities, by not showing traditional colors or depictions of people. So right. There are some upside down. Yeah. But talk to us about how you approach this.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, part of the sort of job of reimagining what sex education is like is to sort of name some problems with sex education, which is that it tends to be very biomedical, very focused on intercourse and making babies and STIs. And that is not, like, the fact that we start most sex education with reproduction makes no sense to me, because sex is not primarily for reproduction. Most of the sexual activity, which we could include masturbation, we could include everything in there, the vast majority of sexual activity that happens on the planet is not for reproduction. So why do we start with that? And of course, when we look at the media, that's also not like when the things that kids learn from watching shows on Netflix or YouTube, they're not learning about reproduction. They're learning about the relationship stuff. they're learning about pressure, they're learning about identity. And this is the thing that most kids want to know about. So that's what we focus on. We don't focus, I mean, there is a section on reproduction, but that which also includes all the ways of reproduction, right? So we talk about there's many ways to make a baby. So all families can find themselves in the book. But we're more interested in the relational stuff, not the biomedical stuff. And in terms of the way the books look, they just kind of look like our world, right? So Fiona and I both live in a really diverse city. And so it actually just looks a lot like the place we live. But a lot of times books are sanitized, so they don't look like the place anyone lives. So I think it's not that like it's that we didn't sanitize, as opposed to like that we're adding things in.
Well, the thing that struck me is it's supposedly about sex, but it's really about being a human being.
Yeah.
What is it to be human? To be flesh.
Right.
Right. I mean, and you say, the way we learn about sex, however, is different from the way we learn about almost anything else. I mean, my parents didn't talk to me about it. Very few teachers talked to me about it. I went to a Catholic school. There wasn't, and my peers, it was hard to learn from them in many ways.
Yeah, and also I want to say, like, it's the thing is like the reason that this book focuses on that is because it's also a book for 10-year-olds. So the fact is, it wouldn't make sense to me. That's the other thing. I don't really understand why I'm going to start a lesson with a group of 10-year-olds about intercourse. It's not necessary. Those kids are not having intercourse, right? They may be kissing or they may be imagining it. But so it is about having a body and being human, because at that age, that's what sex looks like. Sex is not the things that as adults we think of as sexual activity. So we focus on what's real for kids at that age. And so much of that is about navigating friendships and relationships and crushes, as opposed to saying like, this like medical definition, this is what intercourse is. It doesn't resonate with a lot of kids. I spend a lot of my time with young people as an educator, and so the book is really informed by the things that they've told me they want to hear about. And very few of them say, I want to learn where babies come from. I want to learn, like they like the anatomy part because they think it's kind of funny and they're happy to have the words, but they don't want a science lesson. They want to figure out how to like get through grade 6, because as you said, it's hard to do.
Andy and I have done a little of this in the schools some years ago, and I found that really it was about feelings and validating their feelings. Right. And especially for LGBTQ kids who have been taught for their then short lifetimes that the feelings they were having were illegitimate and something to be ashamed of. And this validates people's feelings much more. Yeah,
it does that. And of course, and we do absolutely, we don't center straight people, right? So it isn't a book just for queer kids. I'm a queer person, and I was a queer kid. I didn't know that at the time, so I didn't have that language. So certainly this book is written for, the book is written in part for it's the book I wish I had. But the book is also for straight kids. It's for really any kid. But what we do is we decenter straightness, right? So heterosexuality and being straight, and the idea that a boy is going to have a crush on a girl is never the first example or the main example. So it makes a kind of, it's a way of shifting things, which is very different than what kids usually see. Like the main thing. And
young people have today have a much more expansive view in how they identify or don't identify. I'm wondering, as I was reading it, if we older people had all these options in our heads, if we might have come up with different ways to identify.
I mean, we would have, and in fact, we did, right? So they're just doing it. I feel like they're doing better and more, and I think that's partly because what the generation tries to do is like reduce the amount of violence that the next generation experiences. And so young kids are still experiencing a lot of violence and oppression, but in part because of social media, because they can connect in all these ways, they are coming up with more and more terms, but it's part of a tradition, right? But certainly, I identify with what you're saying, and that like, it's hard for me. Like, I learn so much from young people, and part of what I learn is like, I'm actually allowed to be whoever I am. Like, you think I should know that by now, given what I do, but I don't, right? I grew up in the 70s. I still feel like there's certain things I can be if my body doesn't look this way, or if I don't wear these colors, then I can't call myself this. And the message that I get from young people is, if the word fits for you, if it really resonates with you, then you can. And there's lots of ways of being queer, or lots of ways of being pansexual, or asexual, all these different identities.
Well, that's a hopeful point of view. One thing that really struck me strongly about the book is the fact that you ask questions of the readers. Mm-hmm. You're not just telling them things, you're asking them to respond to questions. Right. And so I wonder what you find out about the answers they give or how they talk to each other. If you're in that milieu of those kids, are you seeing them have conversations among themselves?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes. So absolutely. I'm glad you brought it up because it's sort of a fundamental part of the book. And it's part of why the book is called, Sex. It's sort of double meaning because it's also, I want young people to know that they actually know a lot about sex. They may not know that it's about sex because, again, when most people hear the word sex, they think adult sexual activity. But sex is gender, sex is feelings, sex is relationships, sex is how we deal with the media. All of that is part of sexuality. And so by asking questions, we're kind of validating, we're saying what you know is important. And what I found, I was worried at first because this book is for kind of tweens. And, a lot of people were like, how are you going to, they're already so closed off and so cynical and too cool for school. And it has not been my experience yet. The book is still very new, so I'm just now starting to hear from young people. But offering them the proposal that you can actually talk about sex without shame, that you can share how you feel, and that how you feel can be different from how everyone else feels, and it can still be valid. It seems to embolden them to want to answer the questions. So the actual answers are always unique, but the nice thing is that they really want to answer those questions. And I actually want to say something. I was thinking, Anne, when you mentioned being in schools, the benefit I have, or it's just a different interface, is that books are still this kind of really lovely, when you're in front of a classroom. To be a queer person in front of a classroom with a mixed class and you don't know what they're coming to you with, people are performative, right? Everyone is performing, and that's the structure. That's what school tells us to do. When a young person is reading a book by themselves, they're kind of by themselves, and there is a kind of openness as a reader. But because there's these characters in it, there's also still some interaction. So I love writing books for that very reason. I think that there's a different educational opportunity. It's very different standing. I do it too. I stand in front of classrooms. The way I do it and what I can get done in a classroom in an hour is so different than what we can get done in 6 pages in a book.
So who's buying it and who's using it? Although yes, it was a great experience reading it by myself and at my pace. But what it could be used as a textbook, could it not?
Oh, yeah, it is. So, this one just came out in April, so I don't know that anyone's using it. It came out in April, so it hasn't been used in classes yet because we haven't had a school year yet. But Sex is a Funny Word, which is our second book, is used in lots of classrooms. So certainly in the States, it's used in a lot of independent private schools. In Canada, it's used in some public schools. And it's in school libraries. I'm an educator, so I talk to educators and I talk to librarians a lot and parents and point out the book was written for kids to be reading it on their own and in families. So usually what happens is a teacher will use pages of it, but not the whole thing, because the questions can be quite personal. And so all those questions are not appropriate to answer in a classroom setting. But it is getting used. And I think, I think that the other thing that people like about it also is that it looks and feels it doesn't look and feel like a textbook, right? So it's quite joyful. You read it, so and it's a long book. So the fact that you read it suggests that you enjoyed it. And a lot of that is that it doesn't look, most sex ed books kind of look like medical textbooks for kids. There's this kind of subtle message, which is nobody really wants to do this, but we got to get this done. So let's just get through it. And we try to be more celebratory.
And you may be the least judgmental person I know. You really make an effort not to put anybody down, although you show some kids putting each other down, that they have to deal with that. But you say you bristle against the language of liberal and progressive because you want to write the books for as many people as possible. You want this for religious people to be able to use this and enjoy it. So that was something, and yet you do have certain values that you affirm.
There's values, but there's this piece about identity politics. Again, I think it has to do with the way I came up in sort of the 80s when identity politics were so intense and very narrowly focused. And it meant you could only be a certain kind of person. And also, you'd only get services if you identify as trans, then you get these services. If you identify as gay, you get these services. And of course, lots of us are lots of things. So what I want the book to, I don't want young people to have to be a certain thing in order to get information, education, especially with young people, because maybe they don't want to choose something yet, right? So you want to be very non-judgmental, and really be clear that like you can take this information in and figure out what it means to you before you have an identity. It's not important. I mean, because the pressure still exists, right? So kids are more complicated and they have way more labels, but there's still a normativity, right? There's still like queer normativity and trans normativity. Like, there's still this pressure. There's like a right way to be a freak now, which is funny, but it's true. And then there's also, I mean, this is a different topic, but like I find it fascinating in Canada. When I was doing research on this book, because when I started writing the book, we had gay marriage had been legalized for 10 years. And I was reading it with kids that were 10 and 11 years old. And when I asked them what gay meant, almost all of them said gay means a man can marry a man and a woman can marry a woman. And having grown up in the 70s, like, it's like, that to me is fascinating. And of course, there's like, it's complicated. Like, I don't know, honestly, I don't know if I love that, right? I mean, I love that people, I want people to have equal access to the kinds of relationship formations they want. But of course, in my world, being gay is much more than that. So I think, yeah, that we really, what I'm trying to work against is the sort of narrow identity politics, so that kids can be lots of things.
Well, your next book may get into a little more of the history to teach people how to put all this in context. So finally, I mean, this is a very hopeful, reassuring conversation. Are we panicking too much about the culture wars in the United States?
No. I mean,
take us right back to the.
I do feel like the thing is, you know, I do feel like the cat is out of the box, right? So the internet is there. So it's not like, so when parents are trying to like get these books removed from the libraries in their state, their young people are going to have access. The young people are going to know that gay people exist, that trans people exist, that queer people exist. And that's important because that's part of what keeps them alive, right? Is knowing that there is a future there. That for many of us, we didn't know that when we were younger. And it's what made our lives precarious. So in that way, you know, it's not like there's that. But no, it's awful. And again, like what's to me so scary and is the violence, right? Is that it is much, I find it, you know, our last book came out in 2015. I find the climate much scarier for me and for my colleagues than it was in 2015. And I'm glad that so many people, like many librarians, especially librarians and teachers, are doing what they can. And the students are fighting back. They are, and they will continue to. But of course, there's all this harm that's being done, and it's, I mean, to my mind, unnecessary. Well,
we're about to launch into a long litany of more horror stories from this week, but
and some encouraging ones.
Okay. Yes.
And this is a very encouraging book, and we will tell you more about it in our email and more about Cory sex, bodies, gender, puberty, and other things. It's 400 and something pages, but it's light reading because it's mostly illustrations, but with chock full of information. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you.
Thank you for the work you do, and we'll look forward to your next efforts.
Great. Bye.
Cory.
Bye, Cory. Nice to meet you.
Wow. Yes, a little ray of sunshine in a very screwed up world. Okay, a couple of stories coming out of that, and one is the newspaper in Nebraska at Northwest High School, a student newspaper that's been in operation for 52 years, that has been canceled by the high school because, along with the whole journalism program, because they were writing about LGBTQ stuff.
They only did a couple of gay stories in the paper, and the authorities just got in there. They were already telling a trans masculine kid, you have to use your birth pronouns, that kind of stuff. So it's a conservative community.
Well, that stuff is sweeping the nation of forcing trans kids to use their birth names in school. My favorite horror story comes from Idaho, where in Boundary County, the librarian has resigned because armed protesters showed up to attack the library with a list of books they wanted banned. None of those books are in the library.
Right. And I want to say to the kids of Nebraska with that school newspaper, I hope you start an underground newspaper. I don't think you'd have a lot of trouble raising money to do it, and just keep going.
And pretty horrifying that the Republican nominee for governor in New York State, Lee Zeldin, showed up at the church of the horrible, legendary homophobe Ruben Diaz to pledge his dedication to a don't say gay law or something like it in New York State.
That would be worse than Florida's.
Yes, although Florida's has been stretched to cover everybody, but Zeldin thinks you should not discuss anything about sex with anybody through 7th grade at least. And Ron DeSantis was supposed to do a fundraiser for him. He had to instead attend a funeral for a police officer, but he's promised to come back and do the fundraiser.
All right, better news from Brooklyn in Park Slope. Last year, we told you about at PS 95, school administrators removed a diversity mural as too divisive because it incorporated a couple of LGBTQ symbols, a quote from Audre Lorde, who was a lesbian and the late poet laureate of New York, and a BLM poster, Black Lives Matter. Well, now all those administrators are basically gone that put the kibosh on this, and now it has been painted on the outside of the school. So that's terrific. Now, this was designed by 5th and 6th graders.
Well, that's the thing. I think the kids will save us, and I am thrilled at the extent to which they are fighting back. In Flagler County, Florida, a guy we've heard from before, Jack Patosh, who led demonstrations and school walkouts against the Don't Say Gay bill, is one of 3 teen activists there who organized themselves to get rid of 2 school board members who were
lunatics.
Yes.
Well, I mean, listen to.
They organized a recall vote. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, what did these conservative school board members do? They referred to activists as useless people and implied BLM protesters should be shot. They used an anti-Semitic Twitter feed to send it out. Another one said the pandemic was planned to overthrow the government. And then the other one filed a police report against the library for carrying gay-themed books. A police report, and that was thrown out. So these people are zealous.
Lunatics is probably too kind because they know what they're doing and it's all evil. So the kids organized this recall vote and succeeded in getting them thrown out.
Knocked on 5,000 doors. Now, of course, most of the money is coming in for school board members who are even more right-wing, and that's one of DeSantis's things. That's what he did. Now, in Kentucky, we've told you a little bit about this, but there's a trans girl, Fisher Wells, 13, who helped get the Westport Middle School's field hockey team started. And the Kentucky Athletic Association won't let her play at all. They require sex reassignment surgery before, so not surgery, but sex reassignment before puberty, though not clear what that means. And completed anatomical changes, of course, that are not even available to minors in most cases. So her teammates are standing up for her. The school district said non-discrimination policies trump the regulations. And she got to play one game, and that was their only victory. And then in March, Kentucky passed the law banning her. So it's just so cruel.
Every time they score a goal, her teammates yell, "For Fisher," on behalf of her. But yeah, it's a catch-22. They don't want any surgery for minors, but they won't let her play because she hasn't had surgery.
That's crazy.
Crazy. And
Right.
They're getting worse and worse in Texas, too. Governor Abbott is threatening to prosecute schools and teachers and librarians who do not go along with his censorship rules. They are financing, there's a new, phone company called Patriot Mobile, which is financing Christians running for school boards. That's how they're populating those school boards.
Right.
Teachers are ending up self-censoring their classrooms and pride flags and stuff because they're scared.
It is all a demonstrable plot to essentially end public education.
And in the recent primaries, DeSantis didn't have any big candidates to endorse or campaign for, so he campaigned for 30 school board candidates. 20 of them won, and 5 more are in runoffs. And these are all more lunatics.
Back in Texas, the Colleyville district near Dallas banned discussion of trans people in schools, or what they call gender fluidity, prohibits pronouns not aligned with sex assigned at birth. It was, again, organized by the Patriot Mobile Action, which has spent millions electing conservative majorities to school boards.
Hundreds.
A United Methodist minister called all this a fascist agenda, and I think the president is getting to that too with his speech on Thursday.
And hundreds showed up to object, but they are putting all this into place. And unless people come out to vote these people out of office, this minority fascist rule is going to only expand.
But in Maryland, a federal judge threw out a lawsuit from parents who oppose the school district's plan to support trans students.
And a federal judge, wait a minute.
In San Jose?
No, wait a minute. Did you just do this? A federal judge rejected 3 parents' challenge in Maryland?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Sorry.
In San Jose, a Trump judge says that Pioneer High School must recognize the fellowship of Christian athletes, even though it discriminated based on sexual orientation. And what they say is something we have to listen to, that secular groups that violated the policy are not penalized. For instance, a senior women's club excluded boys. So there is no, you get into some issues here.
Well, this is the eternal argument about affiliation and whether you can limit membership if you want to affiliate, particularly if you are an oppressed group as opposed to a dominant group, and where all that stands versus the constitutional guarantee of religious freedom.
Well, in New York, they used to close lesbian bars because they wouldn't serve men, or they were reluctant to serve men.
Yeah. All right. I think we can move on to political news. And
yes, in Florida, Matt Gaetz won his re-election to Congress nomination, but he's still under investigation for sex trafficking and has an admirable Democratic opponent, Rebecca Jones, who took on DeSantis over the fudging of COVID numbers.
And 7 LGBTQ Democrats won primaries in Florida for the state House and Senate. The only Democrat currently in the Florida legislature who voted for the Don't Say Gay bill was defeated in his primary.
And Charlie Crist used to be a Republican, now a Democrat, won the Democratic nomination for governor to run against DeSantis, and Val Demings will face U.S. Senator Marco Rubio.
Yeah, long shots both, but not impossible. All right, in New York, we had a series of primaries. As you may know, the out gay black Congressman Mondaire Jones, forced into a different district, lost the primary to Dan Goldman, frequent MSNBC contributor, the lawyer who was involved in the failed attempts to get rid of Trump by impeaching him. He was impeached, but he wasn't convicted.
Right. On Long Island, out gay Democrat Bob Zimmerman, there on the left, will face out gay MAGA Republican George Santos for a U.S. House seat. Now, we reported on Santos being favored in this race a couple of weeks ago. I think that was before the Dobbs decision, because Dobbs has shifted things, and I think it gives Zimmerman much more of a chance. And of course, many Republicans across the country, you've heard it, they're running away from their absolutist anti-abortion positions like they never held them.
It's astonishing. If the electorate falls for that, I give up. I don't really give up, but it only reinforces.
And you have to give some credit to upstate Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney. Very controversial this year, but he won his primary for the U.S. House handily, despite alienating a lot of progressives.
Yes, he did. And Richie Torres, who's in Congress from the Bronx, won his primary also. Now, one of the, and another queer candidate, Brittany Ramos de Barros, lost her primary to Max Rose to run against Nicole Maliotokis,
who was a closet case.
Yes.
Now you mentioned the Dan Goldman, very famous race, the Village and parts of Brooklyn. Dan won that with 26% of the vote. But so 65% of the voters there voted for a progressive candidate. Dan is much more moderate. He's not a monster, but he's
three different progressive candidates.
Right, much more moderate. So people are Mondaire Jones just got off the working families line. He's stepping aside. This gives Yulene Neo a chance to get on that line and just give voters a choice in November. I don't know why this is controversial. This is the way Tish James got her start in politics. She ran against.
I assume it's controversial because they're afraid she'll split the vote and some Republican will see.
Yeah, no Republican can win that district. She cannot be a spoiler.
Well, I certainly hope not. And I'd love to see her elected over Dan Goldman, but she hasn't made a final decision yet, but she's on the verge. And she's a queer candidate. All right.
Wisconsin?
Sure.
Well, Peter Schmidt won a Republican primary for the state assembly, but the party is trying to dump him because of past criminal activity and promote a write-in candidate. Schmidt is anti-gay, but has been exposed for enjoying same-sex flings. There's even a tape of it. He says he's reformed, he's a strong conservative and Christian, and that the videos are being used to blackmail him. He says he briefly struggled with his sexuality. Okay.
I don't think he's struggling very much on the video. I haven't seen it. That's just.
We're not showing it to you, not even in the email.
No, don't show it to me either. He was forced to go to an anger management class. So we'll see.
The Republicans are trying to push, it's a Republican district, and they're trying to push a write-in candidate.
In Maryland, Tia Hopkins and Antonio Bowens, both non-binary, have been elected to the Democratic Central Committee there. So that's a little step forward. In Oklahoma, the guy we talked about last week with Catherine Stewart, Scott Esk, the guy who says stone gay people to death, he lost his primary runoff for the state house.
And it was nice to see Carl Palladino, basically a fascist, pro-Nazi bigot, lose upstate for a Republican primary. The guy who won, Longworthy, is no prize, but Carl Palladino is, in Lorena Bobert territory. All right.
It turns out that Liberty Counsel, our foes in the courts, has had itself declared in some parts of itself a religious nonprofit. So the anonymous hackers hacked into their records and found that they were endorsing political candidates illegally, along with the Family Research Council, which has also had the IRS declare it a church in the Trump administration. So now these people are being revealed as lawbreakers, although progressive churches endorse progressive candidates all the time. So
some controversy in New York. So it's a breakthrough for an out LGBTQ person to be the chief judge of New York. They have made out gay Anthony Cannataro part of the conservative bloc. He's a Democrat, but conservative bloc on the State High Court of Appeals. But it may have been done improperly because the person he's replacing voted for him, even though they're not supposed to vote until she's gone. This Janet Fiore, who was leaving in a cloud of scandal. So we'll see what happens with that. Governor Hochul was supposed to appoint a permanent replacement, and we're pressing her to appoint a liberal to rebalance that court.
I certainly hope she does that, because it's really been dragged to the right under
By Andrew Cuomo's appointments.
badly. All right, and in North Carolina, people there are sitting down in groups to write letters to Tom Tillis, senator from North Carolina, to keep him devoted to his pledge, sort of, to vote for the Respect for Marriage Act. And
it's kids that were doing it mostly.
Yeah.
In Modesto, California, the far-right Proud Boys held their annual straight pride gathering outside of Planned Parenthood headquarters when it turned violent. And instead of arresting the Proud Boys, the police shot into the crowd of protesters with pepper balls and beanbags. Counter-protesters vastly outnumbered militia members and the hate preachers who were hurling anti-LGBTQ slurs at the protesters.
And racist slurs. But two of the progressive counter-protesters got arrested, and one of the Proud Boys. But it was
and in Texas, in Roanoke, anti-LGBTQ protesters at a Sunday drag brunch were met by armed protesters from our side, carrying rifles, and vastly, this is getting heavy, vastly outnumbering the protesters.
Well, that's what I mean about this getting scary. I mean, these people are showing up with guns, and they are not holding back on their violence, and it's getting very, very scary out there. But in McAllen, Texas, a small piece of good news, the Door Christian Fellowship Ministries has admitted that it stole Hamilton and rewrote it to include Jesus, and did that illegally, and they are paying damages, and the damages are being donated to the South Texas Equality Project, which is a coalition of progressive groups working on LGBTQ and other issues.
Also in Texas, activist Chaz Stevens is donating "In God We Trust" signs to schools, which have to be put up if you donate them under the law, in Arabic.
The schools are saying, no, we've got enough signs. We don't need yours. They're trying to refuse.
But everybody has a sign already?
Yes, we have one sign. That's all we need.
Well, anyway.
Patriot Mobile is shopping those signs around, the "In God We Trust."
All right. In Arkansas, a federal appeals court says the state cannot enact a law banning gender-affirming care for trans youth because the law relies on sex discrimination. There was a 3-judge panel, upheld a lower court ruling. The law prohibits things like puberty blockers, hormone replacement therapy, or surgery, which is not done for under 18s, but they ban it anyway. So these laws are also in place in Alabama and Arizona.
Why don't you tell us about your old friend in Virginia?
Well, look, Governor Youngkin is stacking the board of visitors of the University of Virginia with right-wingers against wokeness, against diversity programs, and one of them was Bert Ellis, a guy I went to school with, a classmate of mine. So he was exposed by the Cavalier Daily this week when we were at school together. He sponsored a white supremacist speaker, William Shockley, notorious, and thought that was something about, free speech. And yet, when we co-sponsored with his group, but without his consent, Frank Kamedy, the father of the gay movement, he stopped it. He took away he didn't stop it. He took away the University Union funding, and we did it anyway. But he made all these anti-gay statements. So he makes all these statements about free speech. This is what Jefferson was all about. But when he was in school, his idea of free speech was white supremacists.
Has he recanted that 50 years later?
No, he won't even talk to the press. He's just gonna do what he can to dismantle liberal education in Virginia.
They're all shameless now and relentless. A gay party promoter in New York City, Michael Cohen, is in trouble.
Michael J. Cohen, this is not Trump's guy.
No, charged with a number of sexual assaults. He's in trouble.
There are a score. It's like 20 people or something who have told stories about him that are pretty terrible. And he denies it all.
All right. Terrible stories from Virginia and Pennsylvania of two trans people, a trans man, Aaron Lynch, on the left, 26 years old, and trans woman Maddie Hoffman on the right, 47. Both were experiencing mental health crises. These are separate stories, but very parallel. Their families and friends called the police for help to have them bring mental health counselors and help these people. But what ended up happening in both cases was the police shot them dead.
Yep.
Terrible.
It's, look, the stories are complicated, but they've got to find a better way to deal with these mental health issues.
Well, these cases happen. The history of people with mental health problems being shot by the police is
most of the people in prison have serious mental health issues, which is not a good place to be when you have mental health issues.
Right. On the other hand,
in Philadelphia, veteran lesbian and civil rights activist Susan Silverman has died at the age of 73 at the John Anderson LGBTQ-friendly apartments there in Philly. Her activism began in 1968 in New York Radical Women, the group that protested sexism at the Miss America pageant. She came out at 19, was on the steering committee of Alternate University in the East Village when the Stonewall riots erupted, and she secured a space for the Gay Liberation Front. And she joined Gay Youth of New York. She was a kid with Mark Siegel. She joined Lavender Menace, and she's remembered as a true icon of the community. She worked as a social worker focused on people who experienced child abuse and those with bereavement issues.
And another icon locally here in New York was Mel Stevens, who just died very suddenly 3 months after losing his partner, Tim Lunsford, to ALS. Mel was in Sarasota, Florida, visiting his sister and went swimming in the ocean and suddenly had a heart attack. This is a huge shock to the activist community in New York. He was the sweetest guy. He worked as a nurse for many years, and he joined ACT UP because he also had a lot of rage at injustice. And
he had a partner that he was with for decades who died of AIDS, and that radicalized him in the early 90s.
And he was at every demonstration for decades and decades. He went on from ACT UP to every other protest organization, and most recently Rise and Resist, going after Trump endlessly. And he was just both the angriest guy and the nicest guy.
And
Mel
when we say he was at everything, he was at everything. He put me to shame. In terms of just showing up all the time in Washington, confronting Bill Clinton at a big dinner in 1997 about needle exchange and things like that.
An HRC dinner. Yeah, no, we got into a tuxedo to go to the Bill Clinton speech at an HRC dinner. And of course, everybody at HRC got furious at him for going after Clinton. But like all of us in ACT UP, that wasn't the point. The point was to call out injustice and life-threatening actions wherever they occurred. Okay. That picture of him on the sailboat, he had a sailboat in New York that he kept in Sheepshead Bay. He was a dedicated sailor, but that was taken in Sarasota the day before he died. Mel looking terrific, but the next day, heart attack, and he's gone. And the activist community in New York is just bereft at his loss.
We will miss him. All right, international news?
Yes.
All right. Well, in Serbia, they're supposed to have Europride September 12th to 18th. All of a sudden, the president, who's a right-winger, Vučić, this is not the president, this is the prime minister. We'll talk about her. But the president said...
Brnabić.
Yeah, but the president, Vučić, said at a press conference, look, we got too much trouble with Kosovo. We can't do it. We got to cancel this thing. And the Orthodox Church is putting a lot of pressure on me. So the European Pride organizers said a ban would violate the European Convention of Human Rights. They won't cancel it. They had gotten assurances from the prime minister here, Brnabić, about the march would be allowed to take place. But the country essentially bid for it, to have the Europride celebration.
Yeah, Europride moves around. Meanwhile, thousands and thousands of right-wingers showed up in the streets of Belgrade this last weekend to protest the idea of Europride. It has been in Belgrade, the annual Pride has sometimes been very violent and contentious.
And the prime minister has marched in it.
Marched in Pride?
Pride, yeah, she's marched in Pride. Yeah.
The right-wingers, I'm saying, are being very
well, anyway, prime minister said, look, we didn't cancel, we're just requesting it. I think they're going to still try to stop this, but it's going to be quite a showdown.
Yeah, the activists are dedicated to getting out there. All right, in Vietnam, the health minister came out and announced that LGBTQ people are not sick. And that people should be educated.
Homosexuality cannot be cured, she said. Same-sex relations were decriminalized there in 2013, but there's still no legal recognition for same-sex relations, but that's a step forward.
Recommended getting rid of conversion therapy. Medical personnel should be educated to respect LGBTQ patients. Kamala Harris was there recently, and so was Jessica Stern, now working for the State Department, former head of EagleHerc, the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission. So their visits may have had something to do with that.
In India, the High Court ruled that same-sex couples and other non-traditional families are entitled to social benefits. The case revolved around maternity leave benefits for a woman who adopted her husband's children from a prior marriage and then conceived a child of her own. So it's not a direct LGBTQ case, but it embraces us.
And also in India, the Tamil Nadu state government has published a glossary of official vocabulary for LGBTQ people and issues. That's a nice little educational move.
A court covering the 9 Eastern Caribbean nations and territories just struck down St. Kitts and Nevis's law against sodomy.
Step by step, island by island, the sodomy law covered only men because, as we see in many places, women don't have sex, just men.
But just put this up briefly. In Japan, the rainbow wheel symbol is popping up everywhere. It's not gay, although it's in schools and everything else, and it's a way to show support for sustainable development goals from the United Nations symbol, and it's seen on trains and classrooms and everything else. Rainbow, rainbow, rainbow would be more controversial here.
Yes, watch out. In Canada, the government has published its first national plan for two-spirit LGBTQ intersex plus people, a national plan. We could use a national plan here.
In the United Kingdom, the race for the Conservative leadership, which will say who's the next prime minister, there's Liz Truss and Rishi, I keep forgetting his last name. Anyway, they're trying to outdo themselves with anti-trans stuff. And they seem to have the same playbook as Orban and everybody on the right wing in the United States, talking about woke nonsense. So reactionaries.
Yeah, and seeing that as the path to election, which is very depressing. In Hong Kong, the Court of Appeals has rejected a plea for recognition of same-sex marriages performed legally overseas. Elsewhere, they say it's against the law. The law here says just opposite-sex couples. We're not going to expand that. You're going to have to do it elsewhere.
In Indonesia, a Harvard trans male activist, Rodrigo Ventochila of Peru, has died there. He was 32, and he died on his honeymoon, got into police custody. They detained him for alleged illegal drug possession upon arrival in Bali. His family is charging he was a victim of racial and anti-trans discrimination and police violence. He was a founding member of the Peruvian trans rights group and had been studying at the Kennedy School of Government. The Bali police say they're investigating, but apparently they tried to get him to pay $200,000 to be released and all this kind of stuff. So there needs to be a thorough investigation.
And his spouse and family and friends were denied access to him when
his spouse was arrested too for a while.
In Finland, the prime minister, who's been in a little trouble for partying, apologized for a picture published from the party of 2 women kissing and pulling up their shirts.
We're running out of time. Monkeypox, the good news, is that, the caseload is going down. That's terrific. More shots coming along. But the first adult has died of it in Texas, a person who was immunocompromised down there in Harris County. The other thing is you've got to quarantine for 4 weeks when you have this. And so God's Love We Deliver is starting to bring food to people, but it can certainly complicate your life and your work life.
They have not officially declared monkeypox as the cause of death in that Texas case because the person had so many severe illnesses. They're still investigating what the actual cause of death was. Right. But they did have monkeypox. All right, entertainment news. Well, the MTV Video Music Awards were, per usual, quite queer. And first of all, we have a picture of Iman and Lil Nas X. Iman at the Met Gala last year wearing that feathery dress and headdress, and Lil Nas X on the right at the VMAs wearing a version of the same dress, same designer, Harris Reed, and Iman, to her credit, said, "Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery." But Lil Nas X was pretty stunning.
Lil Nas and Jack Harlow got 7 nominations and 3 wins for Industry Baby. Also,
and Billy Eichner at the awards said, we've got to show Clarence Thomas that we want gay love stories and not let them drag us back into the last century.
Okay. Also at the VMAs, Bad Bunny won Artist of the Year and celebrated by passionately kissing one of the male dancers on stage.
And one of the female dancers, too. Yes. And Out, Dove Cameron won Best New Artist and dedicated it to all of the queer kids out there who don't feel they can take up space and inhabit the fullness of who they are. 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Tell us about New York Yankee Oswaldo Cabrera.
A New York Yankee, Oswaldo Cabrera, made the New York Times with his necklace that he wears while he plays. And it just took me right back to God knows how many years ago when we were first showing Barry Bonds wearing earrings. And I'm just struck by this necklace. We see Tim Miller, political commentator on MSNBC, wearing a necklace. I guess men are wearing necklaces now. Get with the program, Andy.
Tim Miller is all right. Tim Miller is an out gay former Republican.
Yes.
All right. I want to give a shout out to 2 longtime activists in California, Mark Pomerantz and Joseph McGuire. They're celebrating 50 years together. That's them 50 years ago. And that's them now wearing the same, Joe's wearing the same sweater. 50 years, congratulations. I was married for 25 years, but not to the same guy. They got married in 2008 and again in 2010. It is a lifelong love story.
Congratulations to them. And thank you to Cory Silverberg, author of, Sex, for joining us today. And stay active against this right wing. We will be back next week. Thank you for joining us. Probably at the same time on Tuesday on Facebook at 4 o'clock, but who knows? It's a work in progress.
Okay.
Bye, Andy.
Bye.